Okay, so today I'll be presenting on using keywords and indexing terms to modify document clustering and labels. So a current problem today in biomedical publications is that there's just too many articles published each year, so it's very difficult to stay on top of the most relevant research in your area. And presentation of articles is typically done in a list like with PubMed, and this is not an efficient way for learning about topics or subtopics that may be relevant to your documents. So basically the issue is that you can't see the forest through the trees. It's too granular in the current way it's being done. And there's also no attempt to show topic relatedness. So PADI is a document clustering tool that helps to solve this issue. It shows documents in clusters, which basically kind of shows you, main topics and subtopics that exist within a certain set of documents. And it also shows the document clusters within a semantic, basically, area, which shows the topic relatedness between the different document clusters. So objectives of my study specifically were to modify corpora using keywords and indexing terms in order to investigate the impact on clustering performance using the PADI system. And I did this by comparing a group of documents clustered manually, which I clustered myself for a scoping review that I created earlier this year. And I compared that to autonomous clustering using PADI. In PADI, you put in a corpus and then you input search terms and it creates the document clusters automatically for you. And the user interface is kind of similar to a web browser where you put in the terms in the search box and you hit search. I also investigated expanding search terms with PADI using keywords and indexing terms in order to look at the effect on cluster label quality. So these are the different tests that I ran in order to basically meet my objectives. And the first test, I made a corpus with the title and abstract and no keywords or indexing terms with the search terms machine learning and medication adherence. And then I calculated the purity, which is basically a measure of agreement between my manual clusters and the autonomous clustering using PADI. For test number 2, I basically did the same thing, except for this time I included keywords and indexing terms. And this was done in an effort to compare the results of the first test to the second test to see if including these keywords and indexing terms improved the purity. For test number 3, the corpus includes the title, the full text with no keywords or indexing terms, and the search terms were machine learning and medication adherence again. For this one, the results were the purity, which is a measure of clustering performance, as well as the label length, label descriptiveness, and key topics identified using the cluster label. And those last 3 are measures of cluster label quality. For test number 4, the corpus was the title and the full text, and I also included keywords and indexing terms. And this one was done in order to compare to the results from test number 3 to determine if adding the keywords and indexing terms improved clustering performance for the full text and title corpus. And in test number 5, the corpus contains the title, full text with no keywords or indexing terms, but this time I expanded the search terms, as you can see in the table. And the results from this one were the purity, label length, descriptiveness, and key topics identified. So with test number 5, the idea was to compare the purity to test number 3 to see if expanding the search terms improved clustering performance. And I also have the other 3 measures, label length, descriptiveness, and key topics identified, to see if expanding the search terms improved cluster label quality. And up in the upper right-hand corner of the slide, I have the purity, this is just a formula of how I calculated purity, which was my measure of clustering performance. So for my results, when you compare test 1 to test 2, for the title and abstract corpus, inclusion of keywords and indexing terms improved the purity, which is document clustering performance, by about 7%. When you look at test number 3 and test number 4, with the title and full text corpus, the inclusion of keywords and indexing terms did not improve the purity at all. It stayed the same at 70%. So there's really no benefit in clustering performance for the full text corpus by adding the keywords and indexing terms. And also this was the highest purity I achieved in the experiment. And when you compare the results of test number 3 to test number 5, in test number 5, when I used the expanded labels oh no, expanded search term, sorry. It reduced the purity actually by 14%. So the clustering quality was lower. And the cluster labels were typically longer at 5 words. And they are sometimes more descriptive, but sometimes similar in descriptiveness to test number 3. However, the key topics identified using the cluster labels did not change at all from test number 3 to test number 5. And the way I did that is I put the key topics for each document cluster, and then I used just the cluster labels alone in order to see if I could identify these different key topics. And the number I was able to identify was 4 in both the experiments. So inclusion of keywords and indexing terms in the search terms to expand them did not improve this. Okay, so these are my main discussion points and conclusions. The highest purity I achieved was 70% with the full text corpus, with or without keywords and indexing terms. A possible explanation for this is that when there's enough text to analyze, the key concepts can be determined using the text in the documents themselves. There's basically no need to add any additional indexing terms or keywords using PADI because this increases the system complexity. It also showed no real benefit with the full text corpus. However, I think future work is warranted to consider the weight of these keywords and indexing terms. In the abstract and title corpus, adding these keywords and indexing terms actually did improve the clustering. I think this may be due to the fact that these are just shorter groups of text. So the keywords and indexing terms basically had more weight. So perhaps weighting these terms with a larger text may be beneficial. Also, some main discussion points and conclusions. What is the utility of actually creating these keywords and indexing terms in the first place? So basically for document clustering, these keywords and indexing terms don't really seem to be contributing much to clustering performance or cluster label quality, and it costs a lot of resource to develop these terms, so they might not be useful for this use at all. And also, when I expanded search terms using PADI, it resulted in longer labels that are sometimes more descriptive. However, it also had some downsides to it, such as reducing purity of the clustering. So basically the clustering performance was lower when I expanded the search terms. And also it did not improve key topic identification. So once again, there's no need to expand search terms for PADI. There's basically no benefit and increased system complexity. So for future work, I think that the PADI team should consider splitting the clustering and cluster label creation in the PADI system. Because I did notice that some of these indexing terms and keywords were showing up in the cluster labels, but they were broken down into subparts. And I think this is due to the pre-processing of information in order to improve clustering performance, because it's a key step in doing that. But when you do that, you're actually losing some of the semantic meaning of having the words together or having them in a phrase. So that's something that should be investigated. And for lessons learned and challenges, one thing I learned is that establishing realistic goals is definitely important in a project like this that has some very difficult aspects to it. When you're optimizing clustering algorithms, this is more of like a computer science field, and this is not really something I'm qualified to do. So that's kind of where I was originally going, and then we quickly decided that was not a good idea. Instead, we decided to focus more on evaluating clustering performance and also cluster label quality. Because I already had the list of manually clustered documents, this was a relevant way to go that could provide useful information, but still be within my abilities. Also, clear communication is key. In order to communicate what I was working on, I would present my current approach and get feedback. I think this was really useful because it allowed me to, test out my ideas with people who have more experience in this field and kind of understand better, is my approach the right way to go, or should I go a different route? Also, some of the PADI features were still in alpha. So I was actually asking for features as I was conducting the research. One of the things I asked for that the team did, which really helped me out, was selecting the number of clusters. I wouldn't be able to calculate the purity for this otherwise. So that was definitely really helpful and allowed me to complete the project. And also uploading corpora is also an alpha feature. So I had to kind of wait for that stuff to get the bugs worked out. And yeah, those are two of my references. And any questions?